Hi guys, I have a confession to make. I have spent a lot of money this year on books, and it turns out that I have bought 25 books this year. 25. This being December and everything, I was just seeing how many of the books that I actually bought did I manage to read and review, and how many have I still not read yet. So this video is actually going to be a huge book haul where I talk to you about all the books that I bought in 2024. I have decided to split this video into two parts. So the first part is going to talk about all the books that I bought and read, and the second part is going to talk about all the books that I am yet to read that I bought this year. So it being December, we're eventually going to go into the mode of trying to read as much as possible. But before we get into that, I'm going to talk about the books that I haven't yet read and every single book that I bought this year. I'll grab a cup of tea, sit back, relax, and we're going to get into the biggest book haul video you have ever seen, featuring 25 books. So the first book that I want to talk about is Disgrace by J.M. Coetzee. J.M. Coetzee is a South African author, and this book is actually a winner of the Book of Rites and is a very poignant read. It's extremely compelling. This is set in South Africa right after apartheid was abolished, and in those years, and it deals with one character who is actually a professor of romantic literature in a university in Cape Town. This professor is also a womanizer. He ends up sexually assaulting one of his students. Then the student and him kind of have this relationship for a while, but later he moves out and decides to live with his daughter. A lot of, socio-political strife occurs. And the reason this book is really poignant is because it makes us question what is right and what isn't, because the character is kind of grey. At times you pity him, at times you absolutely despise him. Reading this book reminded me of Lolita by Nabakov. There's a lot packed in very few pages, so I would highly recommend reading this. I think this is one of the first books I read, and I think it was a great idea to pick this up this year. Next, I bought Osamu Dazai is No Longer Human, which is translated from the Japanese by Juliet Carpenter. It deals with a protagonist who is full of self-loathing. He despises himself, and this is about his coming to terms with a Japan that no longer values the traditionalist ideas. This deals with a character that attempts suicide, that is not really a very good husband, and basically it's a very pessimistic book along the lines of Nausea by Camus. So pretty existential. Is not really a fun read, but I read it nonetheless, and it's supposed to be a philosophical book. So if any of this sounds interesting, you might like it, but this was the second book that I read this year that I had also bought. Next book I read and bought this year is Faultlines by Emily Itami, a book that was shortlisted for the Costa First Novel Award, and I think she writes this in English because it's not translated, but this book is set in Tokyo. This is about a woman who is sort of at a crossroads in her life. She's been a housewife for most of her life. She's a mother of two. She has a very mundane existence, hanging laundry and things like that. And one day she contemplates jumping off the edge of her skyrise apartment to the depths below. And then she ends up meeting a man who ends up rekindling something that was kind of lost in her for a really long time. And this is a great exploration of, I think, female identity in general. And I really enjoyed the experience of reading this book and about kind of reconnecting with yourself. So that's what I think this book is about. And it was a really good read in my opinion. But this is also another book that I bought this year that I happily read. The next book is Ex-Wife by Ursula Parrott. Now, this book is set in 1920s in New York in the flapper era, and this is about a woman who is just come out of a terrible marriage, a marriage that she wasn't happy being a part of. And this is about how she is kind of navigating life as a single woman again, and she has to now become an ex-wife and come to terms with this label that society is given her. This is about a woman who got married very early on. She's very young when she gets divorced as well. She's only about 24. So this is about her marriage, which was pretty brief, and her divorce subsequently, and her coming to terms with the identity in a society that doesn't value women unless they're married. So how does she find her value? She's a successful independent woman, a very snarky narrator who comes up with quite a lot of quips that keep you engaged as you read this novel. There were parts that were a little slow, but it really takes you back to 1920s New York, the era of jazz music and things like that. I also like some of the things she says and her strong-willed nature and her resilience, and I think towards the end she kind of undergoes a transformation as well. So this novel is really worth reading if you're curious about marriage life in the 1920s. It does have a few dark themes though, so please be mentally prepared going into this, that you will encounter things like, an abortion scene, then her experiences going through a very difficult divorce and being treated very badly by certain individuals in society. But this also has some really nice aspects. It talks about female friendship and how friendship really helped this woman come out of a difficult time. It's her friends who kind of like pull her out of the stuff that she's going through. And what I think this book does really well is that it captures the whole idea of a bad breakup. All the emotions that come during a bad breakup are like. So it is detailed very well. For that reason, I think it's worth reading. You might find something that you are able to relate to when you read this book. And so that was Ex-Wife by Ursula Parrott that I bought and read this year. Maggie O'Farrell's The Marriage Portrait, which I also bought at the start of 2024. This book is about Lucrezia, who is the Duchess of Ferrara. She marries into this new household that's very rich, and she marries the Duke. And from the beginning, she has a hunch that the Duke is going to kill her. And this is about her navigating life in the 1500s as a new duchess and having to kind of come to terms with her own ideas of her husband and also the narratives that people have built about her husband. For me, this book was really about her being rewritten as a figure who is empowered, because this book is based on the poem My Last Duchess by Robert Browning, wherein the Duke is a person in power and he's viewing this portrait that was commissioned by him, and it was a marriage portrait and the woman was his wife who is no longer there. So in that poem, the Duke is in a state of power and the Duchess is helpless. All we get to hear and see of her is the fact that she's in a portrait and she's trapped. And for time immemorial, she will just be frozen in that portrait. But in this book, we get a retelling. We get to know her story, which I don't think we actually have. This is a fictionalized account of Lucrezia's life and how she was a very smart woman, street smart and capable and independent and thought. So she wouldn't just take the fate that was handed out to her. She would fight for her survival basically, which is what this book is about. So it was a very empowering and truly a breath of fresh air for me to read. As a fan of historical fiction, I really enjoyed reading this book. Next, I bought and read Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin. This book is one for the gamers out there. This is a book that is about love for gaming and essentially the study of games, the creation of games. This is about two friends who have been friends for a really long time and end up taking their friendship to the next level when they both decide to collaborate as partners in a firm that creates and puts out really wonderful video games. The experience of taking your friendship to the next level where it becomes a working relationship, but at the same time, the characters are very nuanced. They have their likes, dislikes, they have their quirks. There are things about them that might put you off when you read. There are things about them that you can find absolutely adorable. So this is about Sam and Sadie and the friendship that they have. Sam is gamer, hardcore, and so is Sadie. I love the girl representation of a gamer. I don't think we have too many books where we get to meet a hardcore girl gamer who builds her own PCs. So I really enjoyed reading this, and it also talks about human interactions and taking that to the next level via gaming, because gaming is a very social activity nowadays where people kind of talk to each other when they're on a game. So even in this book, there was one chapter where you're literally inside the game as a reader and you are witnessing the dialogue between two characters who are simulations of themselves in the video game. So it was a really unique book. It was really worth my money and I bought this year. The next book is one that I've never spoken about in this channel, and that is Soldier Sailor by Claire Kilroy, which is another book I bought and read this year. This has been shortlisted for the Women's Prize for Fiction in 2024, and I, for one, am hoping that it wins. We haven't received a book like this in such a long time, and the reason I enjoyed Soldier Sailor is because it gives you an unfiltered, raw account of what it's like being a new mother. Actually, the role of mother is delegated to the woman, and we don't see men in our society as much engaging in, forms of parenting which are on the same level as what a mother would do. It has like vignettes for most part. So you do get like different images and pictures of her life being a new mother, but you also get to see the minutiae of her life, like the tiniest details, like her putting a sock on her baby and how the other sock is just being struggled out of and thrown. And then she puts a sock on that leg, and then another mitten is being disposed of. So there are descriptions like that in this book. You really feel like you are in the same space as the mother and the baby in its little nursery room, and you are witnessing every passing second that is happening with this woman struggling to kind of really handle this child, because she doesn't have any support from her partner. Her partner is very unavailable, and most often he doesn't even know what the baby is doing, or he just asks her status updates and reports, and that is very infuriating for readers. This is actually written as a letter from the mother to her baby. That's why the mother calls herself a soldier, because she cannot, really rest for even a minute. She needs to attend to her baby, and the baby's name is Sailor. Metaphorically speaking. So basically she needs to be on the move 24/7. She needs to be ready to give the baby Calpol if it needs some, to understand what really is going on when there's no language. She needs to be really tuned into her baby. So obviously there's a lot of sacrifice required, because she needs to be able to, put her needs second. And we see that happening. This book was beautiful in that it really captures the essence of new motherhood, everything that it entails. It also captures the love that she has for her baby in such a beautiful way, which I am sure has universal appeal. Like, if people read this book, they will see themselves reflected in this book. They will see their mothers when they read this book. They will truly understand the struggle that is involved in raising a child. And there's even one poignant scene from this book where the baby is lost in IKEA. When the parents take it to IKEA to buy a bed for the baby, the toddler is lost. And then the panic that is involved, right? So the panic is captured really well here. I've read one of Rachel Cusk's book, I've read one of Sheila Hattie's as well, but I think this was the best book that really takes something like motherhood and makes it very accessible. Reading this book is pretty helpful in that sense. So on to the next one. Next, I read Goosebumps. I found this book in Sapna Book House on the Isles, and this is Say Cheese and Die Again. This is about a boy named Greg who is in a classroom, and he has an assignment where he needs to write a report on a particular topic. He kind of writes about something in his own life that he witnessed, a haunted house, and a camera that kind of brings to life images that it captures. But then the teacher decides to kind of fail him, and the only way he can make sure his paper is regraded is by actually getting proof that the camera exists. So he has to go out with his friends on an adventure and find the mysterious camera, but when he does find it, it ends up creating a lot of problems. And this is a fun, lighthearted horror book, and I really enjoyed the aspect of nostalgia that came with reading this book, and I would highly recommend reading it if you've been a fan of Goosebumps or Fear Street novels in the past. Next, I bought Thirsty Animals this year, which I read earlier this year. I love me a good post-apocalyptic novel, and this is one of those. In this book, we meet a family, a mother and a daughter, Ida, who is part Egyptian, part English, and she lives in a rural Scottish farm with her mom and her mom's brother and his partner, I think, if I'm not wrong. This is basically about what happens when water becomes a scarce resource and dies out. How will people survive? This hit so close to home this year because we actually had a low-key water crisis in Bangalore, where I lived earlier this year. So I was reading it at the same time. So you can imagine how when reality kind of merges with what you're reading, you really feel like, wow. So in this book also, water is being conserved. People have to be very careful about the way they're managing these resources. It leads to a lot of socio-political tensions, and it seems like a situation that could likely happen in the future for the world itself. This is set in Scotland, which is a very green land full of the highlands and pastures, but in this book we see a very arid Scotland. This is also about life in a post-apocalyptic town, the day-to-day, how people kind of lose interest, and it's captured really well, the sentiments around existence in that kind of city, and then how things get a little out of hand when water becomes such a scarce and a very valuable resource. people start fighting, they start looking out for themselves over other people. So it was a really, really interesting read, according to me. If you like dystopian or post-apocalyptic fiction, then this is a book for you. The next book I read is the winner of the Booker Prize, Orbital by Samantha Harvey. I am not going to go into a full-fledged review of this book, but I bought it the day I heard that this book was likely shortlisted. I ordered it from Barshan's booksellers, who were kind enough to send it to me from Delhi within 24 hours. Super fast delivery. I'm going to link my review of Orbital up here in case you'd like to go and listen to that. But that brings me to all the books that I bought this year that I actually managed to read, and I will now get into, I think, the 15 or so books that I did buy this year that I haven't read yet. I recently picked up Haruki Murakami's The City and Its Uncertain Walls, which I'm very proud to have picked up. And this year I've been pretty ambitious. I do want to finish reading this before December. I'm currently 200 pages in. There are multiple books in this book, and this is about a character who is in love with a girl but then kind of loses touch with that girl and then has to kind of come to terms with a life without that woman. This also has a lot of dreamlike sequences, which I'm sure Murakami is famous for. This is about a library, it's about cats, it's about books because it's about libraries, and this has magical realism elements, but I'm surprised that I'm really enjoying the magic realism in this book so far. And I'm going to have a lot to say when I finish reading this book, but I don't want to reveal too much right now. But this is a book I spent my money on quite recently as soon as it got released, and I have decided to finish it before December ends. Another book I bought this year that I am trying to read right now but not being very successful with is The Idiot by Elif Batuman. This is her partly autobiographical account of her life in Harvard. As a student of literature, she meets a lot of interesting people that she befriends, and this is basically a coming-of-age story about her life in her time being a student at Harvard. But it is a bit of a slow read. I am trying to make my way through this as well, and this is another book that I managed to pick up this year. So earlier this year, I went to Pondicherry, and there I went to Tara Books, and Tara Books is an in-house Indian publisher. And they have come out with some really interesting mythological retellings as well as illustrated versions of books that are published abroad. So one of these is Pictures from Italy by Charles Dickens that I managed to pick up when I went to the store because I absolutely fell in love with the inside of this book. Also got this cute postcard. But yeah, the inside of the book is just beautiful. I don't know if you can see this clearly, but this is actually a travel log, but it's illustrated so beautifully. And this is by the artist Livia Signorini. She's an Italian artist. So Charles Dickens, when he visited Italy, he kind of left vignettes of his travels around Italy, and she kind of engages with what he's written by illustrating it, and that was published by Tara Books. So this is a beautiful collector's edition that I bought when I went to Tara Books earlier this year. This is a fantastical and whimsical foray into the twin worlds of travel and the imagination. So I'm very excited to get down to reading this sometime in 2025. So the next book I bought recently is Isabelle Allan's House of Spirits. Isabelle Allan is a Chilean writer. Now, I haven't read any of her books, but this is the book that catapulted Isabelle into fame, and she's most known for writing this book. This is about a family, and the story spans across 3 generations of that family. And apparently this is along the lines of Gabriel Garcia Marquez's 100 Years of Solitude, which is a book I haven't read and did not gel with because of the magic realism. But I think this book is about the paranormal. There are some paranormal aspects. It's about a man who's married to a wife who has the ability to communicate with spirits, the next few people that are born in that line of the family. There are a lot of things that happen within the family, and I think it's going to be an interesting read, and I'm looking forward to getting into this, but probably in 2025. The next book I bought this year that I still haven't read is Private Rites by Julia Armfield. This is a book that is set during a flood and a rain. That in this book it is perpetually raining, and you meet 3 sisters who don't necessarily get along with each other very well, but they would need to eventually work together, I think, and set aside the differences, which is what happens because their father unexpectedly dies. So they kind of lose their father, and that's when they come together after having not met each other for the longest time. And it's also a post-apocalyptic book wherein, new ways of living and new ways of existing have come into being, because things that were in the past, those things have been dismantled because of the fact that we're living in a world where it is perpetually raining. So I like the premise, which is why I picked this book up. But I am just, I think, 30 pages in, and it is going pretty slow. This is also about the sisters going back to the house. Their father was a very revered architect, and he did a lot to kind of enable a smooth living in a world where it was perpetually raining. So these girls need to kind of go and clean up the house, which is a glass house. And I think that's largely what the plot is about. But I'm yet to get into this fully, and I hope that my opinions of this book will change after I've read it. Next, I decided to buy and read In Ascension by Martin McInnes. Now, this book is about a girl who is from a very young age interested in marine biology. So she becomes a marine biologist, and she's interested in studying undersea specimens. Now, one day she gets called to kind of come help with the Atlantic Trench, where they have discovered some things, and these things that they've discovered could be very telling for the entire human species. This is again, I think, science fiction, and she ends up working very closely with a space agency, and that takes her to the Mojave Desert, where more research is conducted. And this is also about her relationship with her family. And having to go and work on these projects would mean that she would need to disconnect with her declining mother and her sister. So she'd have to go on her own path, and that is a decision that she'll have to make. But this could be life-changing. The discoveries that she makes about the deep sea organisms and how relevant they are to the human species as a whole could be groundbreaking, and also for us to learn more about the solar system and the cosmos in general. So there's some connections between the sea and the space, and that's what this book deals with. And it sounds super, super interesting. And I was told by the Booker Prize Instagram page that if you like Orbital, a couple of books you should read are In Ascension, and there's another one called Employees, which I have on my bookshelves as well. And I want to be able to talk about them on the channel, so I will get around to doing that hopefully in 2025. I also bought Boulder by Eva Balthazar when I visited a bookshop in Kashmir. I tend to buy at least one book from every bookshop that I visit for the first time, but that's just one of my quirks. This is actually translated from Spanish by Julia Sanchez. The author is from Catalan in Spain. This was shortlisted for the International Booker Prize in 2023. This is basically about the relationship between two women, one of whom works as a cook on a ship. And she's very passionate about her work, and she loves traveling around via the ocean. And this is about her partner, I think, or somebody she knows, called Samsa, who is the one who gives the nickname Boulder to this woman, who is the main protagonist of this story, and how Samsa ends up having to raise a child, and that kind of brings a strain on the relationship, or takes them to a crossroads where they have to decide what to do in the future. So essentially, this is about the relationship between Samsa and the woman named Boulder, and both of them are very different individuals and navigating life basically together. So that's what this book is about. This book I bought that I'm yet to read is The Pachinko Parlour, Elsa Schwadusapin, and this book is about cultural identity in particular, and how language plays a role in shaping our identities. I'm someone who is a sucker for books about identity in general, and this is about our narrator who is part Japanese but grows up in Switzerland. So she kind of speaks French. This is about her grandparents. They lived in Japanese occupied Korea for the longest time, where they were banned from speaking their own language because it was occupied by Japan. They have then moved to Japan, and they are now rebelling and talking in Korean, being in Japan. I don't know if that makes sense, but this is along the lines of Pachinko in that sense. This is about Japanese occupied Korea, but also present day Tokyo, where I think the entire story takes place. So I'm very intrigued by this. This was written in French and then translated. This is the second book by the author who wrote Winter in Sokcho. I'm really looking forward to reading this soon. Next, I bought Stephen King's Nightshift, and this is a collection of short stories that Stephen King has written. I was only able to read about half of this book, and I still haven't finished reading this. There are some stories that I really enjoyed, some which are largely forgettable. But this is another book that I picked up because while I've read a few of his novels now, I haven't read any of his short stories. So that's something I was curious to kind of explore because each story can be enjoyed in itself. I have reviewed this in part in one of my other videos, which I'll try and link down below. But that said, this is another book I bought this year. The next book that I purchased is Leo Tolstoy's The Death of Ivan Ilych, and this is one of the books that catapulted Tolstoy into fame. It's a novella, and this is about the life of Ivan Ilych, who is a very ordinary man who lives a very mundane life, but he is a court magistrate and somebody who has worked his way up the ladder and up the ranks, being in the court. And this is set during, I think, the 1880s, somewhere in the late 1800s, and this book is about him coming to terms with his mortality, because one day while he was hanging curtains in his house, he kind of slips and falls and he hurts his hip. And from that point on, he ends up going to the doctor, and the doctor says, you got to have to take care and everything, but then later becomes a terminal illness diagnosis, which means that Ivan Ilych will have to spend the rest of his days in bed, something that he was not prepared to do. And he's very focused in work, and his prioritization of his work kind of hits his family life and affects it in a negative way, brings a strain on the relationship he has with his wife. That said, so when he lies in bed, he is forced to confront his mortality. And that is what this book is about. And I love books where you get to confront your mortality. So I have picked this up and I hope to read this very soon. The next book I bought is Butter by Asako Yuzuki. And this is translated from the Japanese by Polly Barton. This book is about food at heart, and this book is about a woman who is really passionate about cooking, and this is based on a real life crime case that happened in Japan. And this woman who is really passionate about cooking, she's also a serial killer and has been convicted for killing several Japanese businessmen. And for that reason, she's in a detention center, and she refuses to talk to anybody from the press or really just not engage on any television interviews and things like that. But there is a woman who's very hot on her case, and that woman is a journalist. But what she does is she has a very different approach. To get this person warmed up and ready to talk, she decides to write a letter to the convict where she writes asking for the recipe of her beef stew. So then the woman decides she can't not reply. So the convict ends up replying to that letter. And through this, they start building a relationship. Of course, they end up talking more about food than anything else. And our journalist who wrote the letter, actually somebody who doesn't cook at all and has only ever cooked ramen. But after this interaction, I think her life changes. And instead of actually working to solve the case, I think something else happens. That's all I know about this book, but I'm really intrigued by it and I can't wait to read this, hopefully in 2025. Next, I bought Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. Now this book is part science, part lot of things, history, indigenous study, and a bunch of things. It's also memoir, and it's also about American philosophy and history. So this book is about giving and receiving and how we should ideally have a symbiotic relationship with nature. We should be taking things from nature, appreciating them, regarding them as gifts as opposed to anything else, and changing our approach in how we kind of look at the world, the natural world around us. The writer draws from Native history and Native American, the experiences that they've had being sent to boarding schools where they were asked to completely forget about their culture and things like that, to how they later had to kind of reconnect with that. So basically, this is a very interesting take on how trees communicate with each other and the natural world, understanding it at a deeper level. So I highly am looking forward to reading this. I did actually start reading this, but I'm around 85 pages in, but I hope to finish this soon in the next year or so. The next book I purchased this year is The Grief Nurse by Angie Spoto. This is a gothic novel. There is a woman who's got a special gift, and her gift is that she's able to take away anxiety and grief from other people and just help them out that way. But these grief nurses are only given to really wealthy families who can afford them, and the Astors are one of the families who are in need of a grief nurse and hire her for her services. So the main character comes to this realization where she has to question whether what she's doing in life, at this point. So she has to help this family who has just lost their son, their only son. They have to kind of grieve, and she helps them with that process, but she kind of gets entangled with a lot of other things as well. And I think that's all I know about this book. But I'm super intrigued by the premise and looking forward to reading this as well next year. The next book I bought this year is Teen Couple Have Fun Outdoors by Aravind Jayan. This is a book that is set in Cochin, I think, in Kerala, and this is about a couple who get into a lot of trouble because they filmed a video wherein they're engaging in sexual activity, and that goes online. This is about Srinath, who is the guy involved in this video. He is acting really strange in his house when the parents find out, and he is somebody who decides to leave his house because of what's happened. And his brother, who is kind of on the sidelines, is sharing his perspective throughout. And it is a very funny novel at times, but also kind of exposes us as a society in terms of how different generations deal with these kind of things. It's a good look at all of that. So I have started reading this. I think I'm like 60 pages in, but I haven't been able to finish this. So that is another book I'm going to be finishing in 2025. Now it's time to share the last book that I bought this year that I haven't yet read, and that is Monsters, A Fan's Dilemma by Claire Dederer. And this is a book that I have started it and I'm reading it in bits and places, but it is going to take some time because there's a lot of intellectual fodder here. This book is about the relationship between the art and the artist. You know, how certain people, especially in the post-Me Too era, they haven't really been the best human beings, but they've put out a lot of art, and we as a population are consuming that art. What do we then do? How do we look at the artist, right? If they have done something that is essentially questionable, but we are appreciating the art, do we have to separate the art and the artist and then appreciate art for its beauty? And that is one angle that she explores. The second angle she explores is if you become a mother and then create art, does that in any way, do the two identities kind of merge in the process, or does one complement the other? And if so, in what way? So that's another question that she explores. And third thing she explores is, people like Woody Allen. We keep looking at stories on TV and things like that, but we also know about their backgrounds. We know about Michael Jackson's background. But when we are like looking into the abyss for the longest time, what are the thoughts that come to our minds as consumers of art? And then finally, she also talks about how it's only the monstrous men who end up making the best art. So is it that monstrosity is a prerequisite for art, or is it something else? So these are some really interesting and intriguing questions that the author asks in Monsters, A Fan's Dilemma, that I'm really looking forward to reading and reviewing on this channel next year. So please stay tuned for all of this and more. And that brings us to a close. We have done 25 books, out of which I think I read only 9, but I think that's a pretty decent number. Yeah, I have bought enough books and I think my shelves are full to the brim and I really shouldn't be buying any more books. But what can I do? There's so much amazing stuff being published every single year. It's so hard being a reader in the 21st century, and I'd love to know your thoughts. Have you read any of these books that I talked about? Is there one that you particularly like? Please leave a comment down below. I'd love to hear from you. If you like this video, do give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. I will be back with more bookish content. In the meantime, stay safe, stay sane, happy reading. Bye.